All right. Record. All right, here we go. So last week, we basically talked about the deity of Jesus, and I thought it was a really good discussion. Y'all had some really interesting things to say. I can't say them specifically right now, but I just remember it was a really, really good discussion. And we just talked about the idea of Jesus being God, being deity, the fact that he forgave sin when only God can forgive sin. He also claimed to be without sin and challenged anybody to be a witness to, if that was incorrect, to call him on it. And no one was able to. We talked about the this idea of teleological. Teleological just refers to a state of being, and you've got things that are created, and you've got things that are not created. And created things are not God, and if it's not created, it is God. So it's a pretty simple concept. It's a word, teleological, that makes you sound smart, but really what it means is just it's something pretty simple. Jesus clearly fits into a being that was not created. In fact, he is the creator. We know, and this is kind of coming back to me now. I remember at the end of last week, we got into a really good discussion. Frank brought up a scripture that referred to, at the end of time, Jesus handing things back over to the Father. And it sounds a lot like taking a submissive role to the Father. And it's important to understand that Jesus does this of his own free will. And that I know I don't have a problem with Jesus taking a submissive role to the Father. We know he did it when he came to the earth and to die for our sins. And if he takes another somewhat submissive role to the Father, that seems to be pretty scriptural with the scripture that Frank pointed out. I don't have a problem with that. We know that he's not teleologically inferior. He is not a created being, just like the Father. But apparently there are times when he does take a submissive role. Tonight, we're going to look at what the book calls fingerprint evidence. Did Jesus and Jesus alone match the identity of the Messiah? And the guy that Strobel interviews is an interesting guy. His name is Louis S. I'm just going to call him Lapidus. I may be pronouncing it incorrectly. It's spelled Lapides. Louis S. Lapidus. Lapides. And I looked him up, spent a little time looking him up. He's still alive and has done a lot of things. He's really an interesting guy. And we're going to kind of look at his story a little bit in our study tonight, but he's Jewish and was raised in a Jewish household, Louis Lapidus. So we're going to look at whether Jesus matches the identity of the Messiah. And Messiah, just when you look at the word Messiah from the Hebrew, the word it comes from in the Hebrew, it just means anointed. So there's a kind of evidence that's very similar to when you think of fingerprints. So everybody has a unique set of fingerprints, which establishes really accurately that Jesus is the Messiah. And I remember talking a little bit about this in a previous lesson, but we're going to focus on it tonight. And that is the Messianic Prophecies. So there are, as all of us know, that in the Old Testament, there are several dozen major prophecies. Now, I've heard a number as high as 300. Like, if you include all, like in Genesis 1, where it talks about, or actually is it Genesis 3, where it talks about he will crush your head and you will bruise his heel, referencing, a lot of scholars believe that they're referencing the coming of the Messiah. That's that's considered probably one of the minor prophecies. But there are several dozen major prophecies that are really clear, that are not as ambiguous regarding the coming of the Messiah. These predictions form a kind of a figurative fingerprint that only the Messiah or the anointed one would be able to match. And so it would be easy to rule out any imposters. Now, Lapides, who I mentioned earlier, who's the expert that Strobel interviewed, he was raised a Jew, and when you read through the interview, these are some of the things that Lapides, some of the conceptions that he had about Jesus. When he was younger growing up, this idea of a Messiah, it never came up. So as he was going through Jewish school, his household, the rabbis, the idea, the concept of the Messiah, it was never brought up in school or his home. He claimed that his impressions of Jesus came from the Catholic churches. So we know if you've ever been in a Catholic church, I know a lot of y'all have. I think, Frank, you were brought up in the Catholic Church, so you can attest to this. When you enter Catholic churches, there are a lot of paintings. There are even statues. So Lapides noticed, in paintings, here's this guy hanging on a cross. So you've got a cross, you've got the crown of thorns, you've got all this blood, and we just kind of take all that for granted, but it was confusing to Lapides as a Jew growing up in a Jewish household. He never thought that Jesus had any connection with Jewish people. Remember, he's a Jew. So he had this misconception that Jesus was this God, lowercase g, of the Gentiles. And the term Gentile, when he heard the term Gentile, he said that for him, that was just synonymous with Christians. So all Gentiles are Christians. So he's a Jew, going to the synagogue, going to Jewish schools, and he's got this idea in his head that Jesus is strictly for all these non-Jewish people out here. There's no Jewishness really about Jesus. So that's a little bit about his background, and I thought I had to kind of think about that a little bit, that perspective. At some point along the way, someone gave Lapides an Old Testament, and I'm summarizing a lot of what I've read, but basically they gave him an Old Testament and said, hey, when you read this, look for these prophecies concerning the coming of this anointed one, this Messiah. Just try to look for these things, these predictions, these announcements of someone who is to come. Lapides said he didn't even know that there was anything in the Old Testament about that there were even prophecies there. He never even thought to look for them. He says that one of the first ones that kind of jumped out at him as he read through was in Deuteronomy, where Moses talks about a coming of a prophet greater than himself. That there's going to be this prophet greater than Moses, and that all Jews should listen to this prophet. And so this, even we do this sometimes. We read things in the Bible, and it really, if we're on a daily Bible reading, and sometimes we'll read something and, wow, that really never caught my attention before. And it kind of leaps out at you. That's kind of the beauty of the Bible. Well, this did for Lapides. When he read this about Moses saying that there's going to be this fella come along in the future that's greater than I am, and you really need to listen to him, it just kind of like, oh, that's what they were talking. Oh, that's what this guy was talking about. Oh, so this is a prophecy. Oh, so it kind of caught on for him. He thought, who in the world could be greater than Moses? So you think about these icons in the Old Testament, especially for Jews. You might think of Abraham. Definitely Abraham and Moses are probably, the top two. So he's going, so there's somebody that's going to be greater than Moses. So we continued to search and read, and this is a course, over a course of a long time. It's not something that happened overnight for him. This kind of thing usually does take a long time. Isaiah 53. His words in the interview was that Isaiah 53 stopped him cold in his tracks. I wrote this down here as a direct quote. When he read Isaiah 53, it just stopped him. It just stopped him in his tracks. And this Isaiah 53, interesting enough, connected him to all those Catholic paintings and statues. He now started going, oh, so the suffering of that fella on the cross, that does look like it would hurt. Now, Isaiah, you read Isaiah 53, the suffering servant, you're going, oh, pierced. He's going to be pierced for our transgressions. So crucifixion, when Isaiah 53 was written, hadn't even been invented yet. And so Lapidus thinks about the Catholic paintings and the statues of Jesus on the cross with the nails going through his hands. He's going pierced. Oh my goodness. Bore the sins of many. So the idea of sacrifice, the idea of being punished for people. So I really thought that was cool, just picturing that would be so cool to be. And here's a guy, he's been to Vietnam. He fought in Vietnam. He did a lot of drugs. He got into Zen Buddhism. He got into all these wild ideas. And then somebody hands him a Bible, and he's got a Jewish background. So you can imagine how confused he is. He's got all these things in his head. And he reads Isaiah 53. And also it just came to me. It makes me think of the Ethiopian eunuch who was reading, I think it was Isaiah 53, and Philip says, "What are you reading? I can't understand. What is this talk?" And Philip explains it to him, and it's just like, oh, it's kind of like that a little bit. So I really thought that was interesting, just trying to put myself in his shoes for the first time, realizing the gospel in Old Testament prophecy and connecting with all those things he saw in a Catholic church, and it all kind of being the light bulb turns on. So some of the major things in this class, we could definitely do a whole class just on prophecies. That would probably be just looking at all the different major, maybe, and some of the minor prophecies, but just some of the main ones that he connected with. So in Isaiah reveals the manner of the Messiah's birth. So he'll be born of a virgin. Micah pinpoints the place of his birth, which is, of course, Bethlehem. Genesis and Jeremiah specified his ancestry. So he's a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and even more precise, the house of Jesse and then of David. Psalms foretold his betrayal, his accusation by lying witnesses, his manner of death, pierced in hands and feet. And remember, this is prior to the invention of crucifixion. And of course, his resurrection. Remember, it says your Holy One shall not see decay. So that predicts the fact that he's not going to rot in the ground. Lapidus says that when he read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he realized that it was about the interaction between Jesus and the Jewish community. And then when he read Acts, it was all about how to bring the story of Jesus to the Gentiles. He stressed that he began to realize the Jewishness of Jesus. And I kind of like the way he puts that the Gospels, basically, when you sum it up, it is about the interaction between Jesus and the Jewish community. we know Jesus interacts with, like, the Samaritan lady at the well. He does interact with some Gentiles, obviously, but it's principally about his interaction with other Jews. And then when you get to Acts, you see things like the Ethiopian eunuch, you see Cornelius, the first Gentile convert. You see then this objective to get the gospel to everybody, not just Jews. Okay.
Hey Lee.
Yes.
Do you know where that verse was in Deuteronomy about that prophecy that Moses made?
I can find that.
It's okay. It's okay if you don't. I'm just saying I haven't thought of that in a while, but it's such a big deal. It makes like the transfiguration even more of a big deal that Moses is there. It's like he's affirming the statement that the Father makes. This is my son and I'm well pleased. It's like Moses is there saying, yeah, that's right. And
that's a good point. Yeah.
And that prophecies came true.
Good point. Yeah. Very relevant point. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Moses was there. Man, that's really good. Thank you for that. Yeah. It'd be easy to find that one. It's just, I don't want to take my phone and.
Yeah. It's all good. I can find it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dan, it's right at the very end of the book, I believe.
Okay.
At the closing of it, after Moses dies, I think. It says there'll be a greater one to come than Moses, which is actually an interesting way to end the book because, then it goes on to continue pretty much the plan of the Bible. But I don't have my Bible handy right this moment, but anyway, Lee.
Good. Okay. Anybody else have comments or questions? Strobel then starts he's got several objections. So he listens to Lapides. He talks, a lot about how he became a believer and the powerful witness of the prophets. But he had some objections, and some of these are pretty good. Some of them I'm going, I don't know. So one question I have always wondered, and I still wonder about this, is that if all of this is so obvious and true, why don't more Jews accept Jesus as the Messiah? Why do they deny it if it's just so clear? And it is pretty clear when you look at some of these prophecies. It's just there's no ambiguity to it. One of the things that he said that Lapides said that they'll do is in synagogues they actually have seminars or workshops that they'll have which attempt to disprove the prophecies. So it'll be the rabbi will go in. I don't know a lot about what all they do in these seminars or workshops, but the rabbis will basically try to disprove the prophets. And a lot of people, according to Lapides, won't even investigate it. They'll just take the rabbi's word for it. They'll go, well, the rabbi says it. Christians do the same thing. If a preacher or someone in a leadership position says something, oh, it must be right because Brother Fred said it. It's got to be right. So he said that's a big problem. A lot of Jews will not go out on their own like he did and investigate and actually investigate the prophecies themselves. There's a big fear in the Jewish community of being ostracized, probably a lot like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, Muslims. I definitely get that. I mean, I definitely understand that a lot of these people, if they become Christian, the amount of persecution, they're kicked out of their family, their synagogue, they lose lifelong friendships. He said that was a big problem as well. There's a name I'm going to give you that wasn't in the book, but this guy's really good, and I've heard him interviewed before. His name is, some of you may be familiar with him. His name is Michael Brown. And he's like Lapidus. He was brought up Jewish. He's a Jewish man, but he became a Christian. He was into drugs. He's one of those guys, kind of like Lapidus. He led a very hard life and then came to Christ. He's I've heard interviews of Michael Brown. You can find him on YouTube. He's got his own show. He's written several books. He's debated rabbis. You can find debates of Michael Brown debating rabbis. So if you're interested in this concept of why Jews reject the Messiah, he's kind of the expert in that field. He's a former Jew, so he's got good insight into that. So if you want some extra things to look into, if this interests you, he's a really good resource. Michael Brown. He's easy to find. Another objection that Strobel threw at him is that could it be that Jesus just accidentally and by coincidence fit the prophetic fingerprint? It's just an accident. This is one that just didn't really resonate with me. I'm just going, that's not a good argument. Lapidus' reply was not a chance. He did some things, and some of these things are with probabilities. Some of them, I think, sometimes can be a little subjective, but it was interesting nonetheless. There was a guy named Peter W. Stoner, who was a mathematician, who did some statistical analysis on the probabilities. The first one he did was the probability of just 8 of prophecies being fulfilled. He said it was one chance in 100 million billion. This number is millions of times greater than the total number of people that have walked the planet. So basically, someone doing just 8 of those prophecies, fulfilling 8 of those prophecies, is basically that enters the realm of impossible. He did another calculation of someone fulfilling 48. I don't know why he chose the number 48, but he did. And this number is just staggering. He says one chance in a trillion, and you have to say trillion 13 times. Trillion, 13 times. That's equal to the number of atoms in a trillion billion universes our size. The universe we live in, our size. So basically that pretty much throws it into the realm of impossibility according to Peter W. Stoner's calculations. And like I said, when people do stats like this, it can become very subjective, and another statistician might come up with totally different numbers. But even if you cut these probabilities way, way, way down, I mean, it's still pretty incredible to think how one person could, fulfill all those prophecies. Another objection. This is one I think we've talked a little bit about before, and I think Zach may have brought this up our second or third time together. Could the gospel writers have fabricated the details to make it appear that Jesus fulfilled the prophecy? So when Strobel asked Lapidus this question, I thought, we talked about this would be a good one. I can't wait to read what he says. So Lapidus says, and I think this is good, I think this is a reasonable reply, that there are checks and balances both inside the Christian faith and outside the Christian community. So there's vetting that can be done. He says that when the Gospels were written, there were people living who had been around when these events occurred, who could have verified or argued against the truth of what they wrote. So you had a system of checks and balances, both from Christian sources and non-Christian sources. And this, to me, the next one is the best one. It's the one that kind of resonates with me more. Lapide says, why would say Matthew, okay, he wrote the Gospel of Matthew. Why would Matthew fabricate fulfilled prophecies? Why would he just make it up to make it work and then be willing himself to be persecuted and martyred for following someone who secretly he knew wasn't the Messiah? Does that make sense? So why would Matthew do that? Not only why would he just write the Gospel of Matthew and fabricate all of that, and then at the same time, years later, be pounded, be cursed at, and eventually be murdered and tortured, horrible deaths that these guys suffered. Not just Matthew, but most of the apostles we think were martyred. I mean, ways that I don't even want to think of. Why would they do that if they knew Jesus was a fraud, if they knew he didn't do these things? This for me is one of the things that just really resonates, and it really rocks me really. It's powerful. I hate that these guys, I hate they had to suffer, and I hate Christians have to suffer today. It makes me sick. But if there's any good that came out of it is it builds our faith, knowing that these guys, they knew, they saw the risen Christ, and that's powerful.
Lee, so I think with kind of what we were talking about,
is similar to that, maybe slightly different. So to say that they wrote their gospels, so they were of a particular literary genre, and I think people would maybe not suggest, they would probably not be likely to go so far and say that those things were fabricated entirely. I mean, most people affirm the existence of Jesus even just as a historical figure, although there is a few, even in the scholarly world, a minority that would deny that. But I think kind of more what we were talking about is that some of these prophecies are kind of being lifted out of their original context, reinterpreted creatively to sort of apply to the character of Jesus sort of as they knew him. And it's kind of their influence and experience of seeing this for themselves, him as the Messiah, that seems to cause them to reinterpret some of these prophecies that were originally given in one context to kind of reimagine them in a new way as applying to this Jesus character. And so the argument there would not be that they completely fabricated this, out of whole cloth, but that there was a real historical person, and, maybe they were mistaken about some of the facts, right? Of course, when you go down that line of reasoning, because we have people that sincerely believe all sorts of different religious ideologies that are willing to sacrifice their lives, the lives of their families. I mean, there's religious fanatics of every sect, and they're willing to go to extremes, give their own life, take the lives of others based on lies. And so that in and of itself does not, validate it. Christianity is the one true religion, but it's kind of like we've talked about before. We're talking about what does this do to sort of shift the probability in favor of this? And so that would be kind of more the line to discuss, all these things we've talked about kind of together help to build sort of that, like this class, the case for Christ. It's kind of more of a comprehensive case. So I just wanted to add that. And I don't think that necessarily goes against anything that you've said, just kind of maybe clarifying maybe more of some of the positions that I've seen when I've talked to people and what I've encountered.
Yeah. The thing about the disciples, Matthew and Paul and Peter, who, according to some sources, say that Peter was crucified upside down. We know that these guys experienced horrific persecution, and I think the thing that's so powerful about the death of the apostles is that, unlike, say, today, where you've got, I'm trying to think, I know Nigeria is experiencing some really bad persecute the Christians there are being killed by the droves. And the difference between, a Christian being killed today or a Muslim flying a plane into a building or killing themselves is that their deaths are based upon something that they don't know for sure is true. It's a faith. And the powerful testimony of the apostles is that they were in a position to know for sure. They would have seen the risen Christ. And so their deaths, it doesn't make sense that they would go to their deaths for something that, yeah, we saw him, he was raised, and not really, we're going to die anyway. That they knew, had they not seen the risen Christ, chances are Peter and John and the rest of the guys would have just gone back to their fishing nets and said, well, he was a really, really cool guy and a good teacher. And man, we thought he was going to be the one, but that grave his body's in there. So they were in a position to know and it wasn't for them. It really wasn't faith. It was something they knew to be true. And that's really powerful. For the Christian to know that.
I think that's a very good point, Lee. That they weren't basing their martyrdom sort of on faith. They actually saw the risen Christ, just like you said. I'm really just agreeing with you, noting that is a really good argument, I think, also.
Yeah, if I were to be arrested by some future government and told to curse Jesus or be electrocuted or have my head chopped off, or I don't even like to think about that. It's something I don't even want my mind to go to. But if I had the strength and I was able to do that, I would be martyred for my faith. And I admit it. I don't know with 100% certainty that Jesus did all those things, like with 100%. I'm really up there high. It's high enough where I'm even willing to consider dying for it. But those guys saw it. Those guys, as John said, we've touched, we've handled. Thomas fell to the holes, and I could just imagine. And you see the way that they behave from Pentecost on. They are like, when Jesus was arrested, they scattered. And then after he was taken back up to heaven, and they were able to see him for those 40 days or however long it was, they were just on fire and unstoppable. They were a juggernaut for Jesus. So
don't we have to pretty much in our lives accept things by faith anyway? We grew up in school. We went and took history in part of our education. We read about Columbus crossing the ocean. We read about World War II, and we read about incredible acts of bravery. Audie Murphy's. Anybody ever heard of Audie Murphy? Probably the most decorated soldier in World War II there was. And we're reading this stuff out of the Bible. Are we accepting that by faith? Do you have any choice but to accept things by faith? I read in the math book that 2 + 2 = 4. Well, I guess I can go and, put two things together and count them and feel somewhat comfortable in knowing that 2 + 2 = 4. But almost every fact that I look at, I accept by faith. I accept the knowledge of the person that's telling me that. When you talk about going to die for something, are you really going to die for something that you've proven to yourself through the normal means of proving things in the world? I don't think so. If you are convinced that Christ is who he is, and that he does what he does, and he's going to do what he's going to do. When you have that kind of belief, that's what you'll die for. It won't be because of some knowledge you have. We have the ability in our world to prove the existence of God and Christ through simply understanding and figuring this stuff out. Because nothing else makes even slight sense. If you believe in something else that has less credibility than even Christ does, even by the world standards.
Thanks, Ted. Yes, sir. Just the last thing that I've got is the last objection. Could Jesus have maneuvered his life, and you've probably heard this before, maneuvered his life in a way to fulfill the prophecies? For example, in Zechariah, his prophecy that he'd ride in on a donkey into Jerusalem. So you guys probably right now in your minds are going, whoa. The donkey is one thing. Like I can go, hey, I'm going to go get in my truck and go to 7-Eleven and get a jug of milk. I can will myself to do that. But think about all the prophecies that Jesus would have no control over had he was trying to force these prophecies true. The Sanhedrin offering Judas 30 pieces of silver, that's a prophecy. Could Jesus have arranged his ancestry before he was born? The place of his birth, could he have chosen the place Bethlehem where he was born? The method of his execution, soldiers gambling for his clothing, could he have willed that, hey guys, go ahead, gamble for my clothing down there? His legs remaining unbroken, his resurrection. So when you look at a lot of the prophecies, they are out of control of, there's no way someone could say, hey, I'm going to make this happen just so I can fulfill these prophecies. That was the last objection. I know that there are others, so we haven't done a complete exhaustive, why, we think about why Jews today reject the Messiah. In listening to Michael Brown, the guy I told you about, in one of the interviews, he was just going on and on about all these things. I'm going, I never thought about that. So there's a lot of other objections, and there's no way we can cover them all. But so if you want to research this further, you certainly can. But for me, it's pretty solid. I'm with you, Ted. I think that it's pretty obvious, and that our faith is well grounded. That's all I have tonight, guys. Y'all have anything else?
I was going to say maybe a potential reason why it's difficult for people who haven't heard what we've heard, maybe they're grown up in a synagogue their whole life. We get the luxury of having people have already looked at all these prophecies, and then they name them one after another. When you're reading, for example, I've been reading Psalms. When you're reading them, prophecy is hard. The Bible doesn't say, here the Messiah is coming. Here are the 25 things you need to be looking for, all on a list. It's not like that. And the Gospels say that something to the extent that this was concealed from a lot of the Jews, but at the same time, it's not like it's that easy at the same time either. I think if you had a really good knowledge when you saw everything happen to Jesus, I think for some light bulbs clicked, but it's not as easy as we get spoiled with sometimes.
Yeah, that's a really good. I like that point a lot, Dan. And too, when they thought they were talking about Jesus coming from Nazareth, and was it Nathaniel? I'm just pulling this out of my head, that said, can anything good come out of Nazareth? So they didn't even know. I mean, just think there's this guy coming up, people are living out their day-to-day lives, and some people don't have even access to the Old Testament scrolls. And so that's a really good point. I mean, and even if you have it and you start reading the Bible, they just don't jump out at you. It's something you have to take study, and that's a really, really good point.
Yeah, I think it was good that you mentioned just tonight about these, what someone on the other side might say, what someone from the Jewish side might say. I think it's super important that we give it due diligence in trying to see why they might reject it, as well as just looking at these other religions. Read the Quran so you at least know, like, so you can look at it and be like, okay, I reject the Quran because of these reasons, because I can say, me personally, I don't have that good of a knowledge of it, so it might not even be fair for me to make a defense to someone who is a Muslim. So I've never even read the Quran, so that's just on my list of things I need to do.
Yeah.
Haley, I included a link there in the chat. This was kind of relevant to what we talked about. This was talking about what Dan was saying. All of the people that would read the New Testament would be intimately familiar with the Old Testament, which some of us are not so much. And there would be certain sort of design narratives and themes that they would be tracking on, to where when they're reading these Gospels, they're seeing, it may be coming across a little more subtly to us, but to them, they'd be seeing some of these definite cues that would be kind of leading towards this idea of Jesus as King. This podcast, I linked it in the chat there, but it talked about, there were three main things that they sort of associated with an anointed king. And so the first one was a physical anointing of some sort. The second was the king had to prove himself in battle as a warrior. And then the third was a coronation. And so it talks about instances of that playing out in the Old Testament, and sort of talks about examples in the New Testament where the gospel writers are tracking on that general pattern. It's really eye-opening, and you'll really catch things that you didn't notice before when you read through those gospels as narratives again. So I just wanted to include that.
Thanks, Zach. Roger, that's good. Okay, well, I guess, before I forget, and I'll send an email to Dalton. I'm not going to be here next. We're taking my family and I are taking a little bit of a trip, so I'm not going to be available next Wednesday. So it's just next Wednesday. After that, I'll be back. But I just want to let y'all know. I'll email Dylan, let him know to send out a reminder and everything. But I apologize for not being here next week.
Is there someone taking your spot?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. So
okay.
If somebody wants to, if somebody has the book and they want to, or they've got a topic that they want to cover, they're more than welcome to do so.
Yeah, Daniel's going to be gone. That's why I'm just curious.
Yeah. Yes, sir. And where we're going to be at, it's going to be at Possum Kingdom Lake. So I don't know what the Wi-Fi is going to be like. So I don't want to say I'm going to be around and then it's not good. So it'll just be next week. So I apologize.
Is there actually a lake over there?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Possum Kingdom. We had a men's retreat there several years ago.
Okay. I thought I'd been over there and I didn't even remember seeing the lake, but that probably was just me. So, okay.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy your time off.
Thank you.
My brother-in-law said that, when you retire, you never get a day off.
That's
so you can identify with that, right?
Yeah, so there's always, it's not a vacuum. There's always something to fill the empty space.
That's good.
Okay, well, thank y'all very much.
All right. Thanks you, sir.
Lee.
Okay, thank you.
Y'all in 2 weeks.
All right, sounds good. Be safe, everybody.
Be safe.
Okay.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Bye.
Bye-bye.